بسعدني رحب فيكم كلكم بنقابة المهندسين باسمي وباسم الرابطة، حضرة النائب، أعضاء المجلس، زملائي المهندسين المعماريين والمهندسين. I would like to welcome our guest as well from abroad, Mr. Ruzzon and Mr. Golembiewki, Miss Christine Mady from Lebanon. المرة الثانية خلال هالشهر عم نجتمع بندوة تم تحضيرها من قبل رابطة المعماريين. هي واحدة من سلسلة ندوات رح نعملهم خلال هالسنة. بس هيدي الندوة اليوم شوي موضوعها مختلف، مرتبط بيلمس الإنسان، بيلمس الأحساس، فإن شاء الله تكون مختلفة مثل عنوانها هي عن Neuroarchitecture. رح نبلش مع رئيس الرابطة الزميل عاطف مشيمش يسمعنا بعض من رأيه.
يعطيكم العافية. حضرة النائب، استجاد الحضور الكريم، يعني أود أن أخاطبكم بدون ألقاب وتسميات، ففي هيكل الفكر يتساوى المؤمنون بالفكر. في مستهل كلمتي، أو بالأحرى أنا يعني ما عندي كلمة حقيقة، بس يعني رح عندي كلمة صغيرة لحتى ما نضيع وقت ونترك الكلام للنائب. أود أن أشكركم، أعرب عليكم عن شكري وسعادتي لتواجدكم معنا إلى جانب مجموعة من المعماريين المشاركين في هذه الندوة، والذين نشهد لهم بالكفاءة الكبيرة في مجال البحث العلمي. بشكركم وبشكر حضوركم. رح نترك الكلام بالمجال المعماري والتنظيم المديني للاستجاد. شكرا لكم.
أهلا بكم جميعا. أنا كلمتي قصيرة لأنه بدي أترك الكلام للمحاضرين. تأثير البيئة المبنية على العقل والسلوك الإنساني موضوع مهم جدا ونادرا ما بيتم التطرق له. الحقيقة يعني معلش لما بنحكي مع زملائنا المهندسين إنشائيين، مهندسين كهرباء، مهندسين ميكانيك، بيقولوا لنا ايه انتوا المعماريين عظيم، انتوا بتشتغلوا، بتعملوا واجهات، بتعملوا ديكور، بتضيفوا على المبنى تاتش جمالي. نحن بنعمل ستراكشر، نحن بنعمل هيكل، نحن بننظم، وانتوا شغلتكم تجوا تزينوا. وفعلا بالبراكتيك بالممارسة بنشوف كتير أحيان، أنا بشوف رخص، بشوف كتير أحيان جاي المهندس السيفل هو عامل الرسم، بيجي الأرشيتكت بيعمل له الواجهة، بتقول له يا عمي معلش بنجيبه غير الواجهة، مش مشكلة، أوكي. نحن المعماريين بنعرف إنه الموضوع أعقد كتير من هيك. نحن بنعرف إنه شغلتنا مش مجرد دراسة الواجهة أو شوية تزيين. الفعل العماري، يعني الفعل المعماري هو بالأساس كيف نعمل على المجال المعماري، على خلق سبيشل، ترابط السبيسز، ترابط المجالات المعمارية وعلاقتها ببعضها. كيف نخلق من خلال هالعمل السبيشل، كيف نخلق بيئة معمارية معينة. لما الواحد بيخطط معماريا، بيرسم، بيخلق، ما بيتبع بس مبادئ التنظيم الوظيفي، ما بيتبع بس مبادئ structural، عواميد وكذا وإلى آخره، ما بيتبع بس موضوع الجمال، إنه خلينا نعمل شيء حلو. بيشتغل بالأساس ليخلق بيئة معمارية. هالبيئة المعمارية ما في الواحد يحددها بهيك علامات معينة. هالبيئة المعمارية جاية من ترابط المجالات، القياسات، المقاييس، الانتقال من جو إلى جو آخر، المواد، واللعب على الإنارة والعتمة، اللعب على كيف يتحرك الشمس ويدخل ويخلق مجالات وتأثيرات مختلفة. قياس الشباك، توجه الشباك، وين موجود وين مش موجود، إذا على الشمال أو على الجنوب أو على الشرق، إذا كان بالعلو أو تحت، كله هيدا بيأثر. بعدين لما بنشتغل على الضوء، ما بنشتغل بس على الضوء، بنشتغل على وين بدنا ضوء، وين بدنا عتمة، وين بدنا هالمرحلة اللي بتخلينا نمرق بين الضوء والعتمة، ما بين يعني كله هيدا شغل العمارة. وهيدا مرتبط من جديد بقول بكيف ننظم المجالات المعمارية. والواجهة ما هي إلا نتاج لكل هالشي هيدا، يعني في علاقة مباشرة بين شكل المبنى وبين تنظيمه الداخلي. وهيدا كله بيأثر على العقل الإنساني وبيأثر على السلوك الإنساني. هيدا بالنسبة للعمارة. نفس الشيء فينا نقوله بالنسبة للتنظيم المدني، بالنسبة لعمارة الحدائق إلى آخره. نفس الأمور تتبعها، يعني تنظيم المجالات العامة، تنظيم إلى آخره. بس أنا بدي أعطي مثل كتير بسيط تما طول. هالمثل البسيط هو مثل خلينا نقول الاكستريم كيس، الوضع يعني خلينا ناخد هالمثل الأقصى. وهيدي تجربة صارت معي بحياتي كمعماري. طلب مني انه اشتغل على مأوى للعجزة اللي مصابين بالألزهايمر. انتوا بتعرفوا انه الألزهايمر مرض يضرب العقل، وتدريجيا المريض بيفقد الذاكرة أكثر وأكثر، بيوصل بالآخر لمرحلة ما بيعود يعرف وين هو، ما بيقعد يعرف مين الناس اللي أمامه، ما بيقعد يعرف هو شو كمان. لما طلب مني اشتغل على أعمل يعني ابني مكان للألزهايمر، رحت زرت كذا محل، وشفت انه بأكترية الأحيان عم بيكون مثل مستشفى، يعني مبنى كوريدور ممر، عندك غرف بالشمال وغرف على اليمين وغرف على الشمال، وبعدين مركز بالنص للممرضة ومكان بيلتقوا فيه. حكيت مع الحكماء، حكيت مع الممرضات وإلى آخره. قالوا لي إحدى المشاكل الأساسية إنه بهيك مكان بحس حاله المريض إنه بحبس، ولا يمكن أن يتجاوب. فاشتغلنا سوا، اشتغلت خلال 6 أشهر مع مجموعة حكمة وممرضات بيفهموا بهالموضوع. طلع معنا إنه أول شيء ما لازم يكون ولا ممر بالداخل، كل الممرات لازم تكون منورة للخارج أول شيء، لأنه الألزهايمر يبدو بيمشوا كتير، يعني عندهم نوع من بيضلوا رايحين جايين رايحين جايين رايحين، فلازم يكون الممر اللي عم نعمله عريض وبعدين منور، يعني اللعب على النور مهم جدا. بعدين الأماكن اللي ما بدنا إنه يفوتوا لها، يعني المكان التكنيك إلى آخره، الألزهايمر بيخاف كتير من الأماكن العتمة، فمطرح اللي ما بدنا نفوت ما لازم نحط نور، لأنه لازم نخلق طريقة بشكل إنه ما بيقعد يفوت لهونيك، خلاص لما بيشوفها بيبتعد. بعدين ما لازم يكون في ممرات ما بتوصل لمحل، لازم كل الممرات ضل ترتبط ببعضها، لأنه كمان الألزهايمر لما بيلاقي حاله بمحل ما بيقدر يكفي بيخوت بيضيع. لازم الممر دائما يكون يعني سيركوي متكامل باستمرار. بعدين لازم دائما يكون في أماكن مختلفة. يعني ما لازم يكون حاسس حاله بنفس لأنه يقدر يعرف وين هو. يعني لازم يتغير، يكون في أجواء مختلفة بين مكان ومكان آخر وما غير، يكون عنده ريبير. يعني يعرف انه انتقل من هون لهون، هيدا بيطمنه لانه كل يوم بيرجع يشوف الكذا وبيستمر، بتضل ذاكرته الخفيفة الكذا انه بيتذكر انه بهالمكان. بعدين شغلة فظيعة، الغرف. الزهايمر كتير احيان بيضيعوا غرفهم، ما بيعرفوا وين غرفته، بيضيع. اذا كل الغرف مثل بعضها وكل البواب من نفس الالوان بيضيع وبيخوت، ما بيقعد يعرف وين هو. فلازم على مدخل الغرفة كل غرفة يكون لها شيء ساين معين من شان انه يعرف انه هيدي غرفته، ويعرف انه هيدا بيته، يعرف انه يعني كل هيدي اشتغلناها. بعدين شيء مهم جدا، اخر ذاكرة بتروح هي ذاكرة الروائح. فلا بد كان انه ينشغل على الروائح. يعني مثلا المطبخ بمكان معين تفح ريحته بشكل انه ذاكرة الروائح تضل موجودة. نعمل شغل على الاماكن، يضل في بمكان معين نوع من مثلا يكون في مي دائما يتحرك، لانه صوت المي كمان مهم. بنفس الوقت هالمي نحط لها شيء من شان تطلع ريحة معينة. الحدائق، نعمل حديقة فيها زهور، ورد، كذا إلى آخره. بعدين شجر مش ورقهم ثابتين، بشكل إنه يتغير الشجر بالخريف كله هيدا اشتغلنا. هذا بيبين قديش البيئة المبنية بتأثر على عقل الإنسان. أخذنا هالكيس الإكستريم، هالكيس يعني تنقول إنه فعلا البيئة المبنية بتأثر على الإنسان. وبهالحالة هيدي لما الإنسان بيفقد كل هيدا، قديش البيئة مهمة بالنسبة له. بس
بدكم تعذرونا، بدنا نحكي شوي هلا بالانجليزي، نعمل introduction بالانجليزي. Humans have always reacted psychologically to places. Neuroarchitecture resides at the intersection of neuroscience, psychology, and architecture. Tonight we are going to tackle these concepts from general finding that enhance human well-being in their built environment to specific cases such as the case of Beirut. اللي لحتى تدير الحوار اليوم بهالجلسة هي زميلتنا الارشيتكت، زميلتنا بالرابطة وزميلتنا بالعمارة كمان، الارشيتكت ماريا الحلو. Maria is currently a doctoral candidate in architecture at the Aristotle University in Greece. ماريا ما قدرت تقول الجامعة، بليز قولي.
تسالونيكي.
اوكي. تسالونيكي. اوكي. Her field of research covers neuroarchitecture, therapy through architecture and urban development based on the psychological state of the community. She has written 3 peer-reviewed scientific articles and a collection of essays. She participated at 8 national and international conferences applying neuroarchitectural concepts to the case of Beirut. She is founding member of the Beirut Heritage Society as well, and she's an administrative member at the Architects Association at the Orders of Engineers and Architects Beirut. So proceed, Maria.
Thank you. Good evening. Thank you for joining us to this event tonight. Since the subject is new to many, I would like to introduce you to that part of architecture that sheds the light on the deep connection between architecture and mental state. We all know that throughout history, humans have always tried to imprint their interventions through the visible structure to defy natural and man-made disasters. So to control hurricanes, earthquakes, or floods, people have built the solution. People have even rebuilt their controlling solutions after being defeated or having defeated and occupied others' land or countries, reflecting through it the state's power and identity by means of a city, creating a relationship between the tectonic space and the sensory experience. So throughout the centuries, people have found themselves spending their lives inside the man-made environment and even surrounded by it. Because like how many times today we will go camping in the woods or spend months in the middle of the sea. So in the city, we have the natural and the man-made urban problems that people try to adapt to. In attempts to solve both, the built environment was not only growing and evolving, but also it was shaping the adapting inhabitants' interaction in the urban milieu through the creation of visible, architectural, and the invisible, which is the social and the psychological fortifications. Plus, throughout these evolving architectural processes, there were professionals from the social, philosophical, medical, and architectural fields who at some point worked together and proved the interdependent relationship between the human and the environment on the one hand, and the natural and built environment on the other. Now, recent findings are leading professionals to support sustainable solutions, healthily balancing the built environment and the inhabitants' well-being, because the city life of today contributes to the increase of psychological disturbances and even mental illnesses, among them schizophrenia, post-traumatic stress disorder, depression, anxiety, and so on. Especially with this fast, high-tech artificial intelligence era, that, by the way, is also helping us measure what we need in the field of neuroarchitecture. So there are the pros and cons of technology. In this era of the fourth industrial revolution, the most important part is for people to still feel that they are in control of the situation, because the sense of control means, to a certain extent, the feeling of survival. If development can create such problems, then why do people work on urban development? When we look in depth for the reasons of cities' urban development, observations and scientific results that we obtain through collecting physiological data such as heart rate, as well as brain activity, using portable electroencephalograms, EEGs. These results show that people have a cycle of creating needs for themselves and working hard to find suitable solutions to it. And this happens to stimulate the senses, such as hearing and even smelling the city. For example, we have the landscape, but we also have the smellscape, which is the design of smells in the city. And as human, we need to feel the senses of our bodies, which symbolize that we're alive. So we find a problem, we find or create a solution to it through the body movement. Then we find sometimes in the solution another problem through our senses. And this would be the cycle of the living. That's why we should examine and measure the reactions, because we can measure and quantify the built environment that defines the relationship between architecture and the mental state of people. And that's why the referral to findings related to neuroscience, psychology, and sociology is incontestable, because we connect physiologically and mentally to space and place. It's like when we tell a story, we start by saying we were at that place, and then we continue the story. Or when we imagine something, we imagine ourselves in a place. So the place is the referral to us. Based on that, we can work on urban design and planning and comprehensive planning, الخطط الشاملة, and even the related laws. So you see, that field affects decision-making in a scientific, evidence-based way, and that work requires a lot of ethics. Examining a community's perception to the built environment they live in helps to show the mental process of archiving memories and interpreting events through individual and collective memories of a city. This is when we discuss, for example, we sit and start discussing stories about Beirut, and sometimes the traditional way of telling the story wins over the real historical facts. And that defines our own story, because we built our story referring to the collective memory, which is the frame, the same as a scenic design, which is the decoration of a theater. This is in some sort the narrative inheritance that help us give a meaning to our story in its past and upcoming events. So not allowing a community to speak up their mind generates what is called the absent memory. That is just a sense of loss of identity that's cut somewhere in the story, such as what happened to us during the war. Our story was cut somewhere, and then we continued from a part that we don't know the starting line of it. As a result of all the aforementioned, we can conclude that everything starts with the sense of place, which is the interaction of our bodies in the external world, with the external world. And it is when our emotions emerge. Moreover, there are a series of emotions that become specific to the inhabitants of a specific city. And no matter their definitions for emotions and values and traditions, all people have an image of the ideal productive city, the one that ensures beauty and security, two elements that humans search for throughout their lives. Beauty and security, by the way, it's what we search for in our parents, and then we search for in our partner, and we search for it in our city. Added to that, we have our personal filters, which are our experiences that define our tastes and expectations, that define or describe the surroundings and our sensory experience. Tonight, we are going to expound some of these keywords and questions that are still, let's say in certain countries, such as Lebanon, intangible or vague, especially when it comes to looking in depth at Beirut's case. As a final point, I would like to take the opportunity of being here tonight to inform you about the role of Order of Engineers and Architects in all this. For those who don't know, I introduced this field in Lebanon in 2015. There was no funding, no precise data, maybe a puzzle of data, missing pieces, and many skeptical people who usually make us stronger. So funding myself, working solo was my solution. But since then also, the Order of Engineers and Architects in Beirut has opened the doors for me to talk about the subject and spread its importance. And since then, they offered me the opportunity to organize many conferences from A to Z, whether here or in Dubai. We had so far 4 conferences from 2016 until today. Also, please allow me to thank President Tabet, who's not now with us, who supported me when I was selected in an international event to discuss my research about post-traumatic urban planning, healing Beirut's inhabitants suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder, and about the urban planning that decreases overweight and obesity, because he believed in the youth potential that we have here in the order. Tonight, I would like to thank them all again, the Architects Association, Atif and Wafa, for giving me the green light to choose the subject and ask the speakers to be with us to share their experiences of great value. Thank you for sponsoring the whole event and inviting this audience through the Order's application and social media. I feel so blissful to see that hard work pays off and comes to fruition. And I encourage the younger generation to engage in the Order here and be more active, especially in the architectural innovative fields. Our first speaker for tonight will be architect Davide Ruzzon. Mr. Ruzzon is an architect graduated from the University of Venice, IUAV. He is currently the scientific responsible of the NAAD Master Neuroscience Applied to Architectural Design at the University of Venice. He is also the Tune Scientific Responsible at Lombardini 22 Milan, and an editor with Vittorio Galese of the Room's international research on the study of the perception of the interior space of schools, hospitals, public halls, and airports. Also, he is a director with Sarah Robinson and Alessandro Gattara of the Neuroarchitecture magazine Intertwining for Mimesis International. Author with Vittorio Galese of Tuned Architecture for 2016 Overview, publisher Padova, and the Architecture of Differences for T. Arch Edizioni 2013 Padua. He has written and edited collections of essays, coordinated the editorial board of the magazine Anfionizzetto, and organized seminars and conferences. He has carried out public and private construction projects and participated in international competitions. Mr. Ruzzon, the floor is yours.
Thanks very much. Thanks a lot. I need pictures and images to show rapidly what I wrote about. After the long transition from the Homo erectus to the sapiens, to the Homo sapiens, gradually the human mind acquired more sophisticated skills. Anthropologists have always searched the reason for, in that moment of the sapiens evolution, the skills have earned such fantastic acceleration. That turn has been named the Neolithic Revolution. It began in the 9th millennium before Christ, giving the humans the ability to cultivate the earth and to domesticate the animals. In the following millennia, they rapidly implemented the phonetic language, the alphabet, and the writings. Until that step, the transition from the erectus to the sapiens had lasted 2 million years. What did happen to humans, fostering the evolution so rapidly? A study by Douglas MacLeod acutely brought to the synthesis several research by Merlin Donald, Trevor Watkins, and many others, exposing a brilliant hypothesis. For a few seconds, trying to close your eyes and to free your mind from daily images of contemporary life. We are now in the south of part of Turkey, not so far away from the Syrian border, and really close to the city of Sanliurfa. We are at Göbekli Tepe, an archaeological site discovered in 1963, even if only later, in 1999, Klaus Schmidt German Archaeological Institute began to unearth the surprisingly large and complex settlement. 3 different lawyers in 3 different historical phases, from the 10,800 to the 8,200 before Christ. Well, we are in the presence of the first massive architecture designed by humans 5,000 years before the pyramids in Egypt. Here, scholars have estimated as 500 people worked simultaneously, moving up on the hill T-shaped stones, 10 to 20 weight tons, 10 to 10 tons weight, sorry, without wheels, 400 meters, and working only with flint tools. Klaus Schmidt thought it was devoted to the cult of death. In the oldest one, barrier at the end of the first phase, we are now seeing 16 circular perimeters punctuated by heavy T-pillars, among which workers closed the rings with walls using rough, dry stones. If we want to understand the meaning of Göbekli Tepe, we need to ask the support of the Merlin-Donald theory about the human mind evolution. Because consistently with this research, the mind developed its configuration in 4 phases, from the episodic to the mimetic, from the mimetic to the mythic, from the mythic to the theoretic phase. The last one is the phase humans moved, the final step to set up the mind, our mind, through phonetic alphabet and writings, tools fundamental to describe the concept till that moment present only in our mind, Architecture carried out a fundamental task in that passage because it took on the absolute power to reshape our mind. Our previous evolutive steps needed an external memory. I quote MacLeod. By so doing, it created a link between the oral, biologically based memory of Donald Mighty culture and the external storage system of his theoretic culture. So it is possible architecture is the key to understanding the Neolithic revolution, because it is through design that symbolic ideas undertook a tangible form. There are other elements in favor of this idea underlined by MacLeod. Why did so large food production not come previously? Under this light, we didn't invent agriculture earlier because we hadn't yet designed a sufficiently complex environment that could reconfigure our mental architecture in a way that allowed us to think about the domestication of plants and animals. Not only Douglas MacLeod, but also Trevor Watkins makes a solid case that it was architecture that allowed us to develop that mind reconfiguration. This revolution brought our ancestors to accelerate, in particular in agriculture. So it seems not fortuitous, as scientists studying the origin of the wheat discovered, at this point for us a not surprising element, which is about Göbekli is one of the several sites in the vicinity of Karakadag, an area that geneticists suspect may have been the original source of at least some of our cultivated grains. Recent DNA analysis of modern domesticated wheat compared to the wild wheat has shown that its DNA is closest in sequence to wild wheat found on Karakadag, 30 kilometers away from the site of Göbekli, suggesting that this is where modern wheat was first cultivated. While the idea as an architecture could have set up differently the mind of humans, fostering the evolution, another big question arises. How architecture and its internal spatial organization could so strongly affect the brain. So, leave your eyes closed, and now image ourselves inside the circle of stone, this circle of stone. We are seated on the circular benches I'm so sorry, not too comfortably, it's true. Our shoulders leaned against the indoor face of the wall, seeing the two big vertical totems fixed up in the middle of the circle. And with their carved images of goddess, bulls, and animals. It works as an external device adopted by humans to transfer their intimate emotional chain, a projection of inner states in an artificial environment. This was a ritual place where they design forms assume the role of the consciousness. Its ritual is depicted through bodies in movement and action. Its essence and meaning, all disjoined in external setting, are a stable and eternal memory. Well, since that moment, that architecture will always be available for humans to reinforce the essence that triggered that design. When you build a scenario, consequently, it makes your mind. This is not a simple feedback loop, but more akin to what the Nobel laureate Gerald Edelman called re-entry mapping. Edelman and Giulio Tononi used this idea to describe how the brain functions through an ongoing, recursive interchange of parallel signals between reciprocally connected areas. And while they were writing about neurons, they might equally well have been describing the space perception of humans. Another point, enormously important, is that this vision about the role of the human settlements is genuinely consistent with the new models of perception developed in the last decades by neuroscience. To the peak, this new passage, we need to come back also before the Neolithic Revolution, more than 2 million years before. Why? Because we must understand where come from those ideas and emotions who require to be externalized in the shape of architecture. When the Australopithecus arrived to stand up on two legs, Homo erectus' evolutive trajectory reached a turning point, particularly about the mind evolution. Robert Linas, a famous Colombian neuroscientist, wrote a book, Eye of the Vortex, around the progressive refinement of the relationship linking body movements with its neural map, the neural map of the body movement. In the brain cortex, signals coming from the sensory system became slowly more and more integrated. Visual with tactile, the balance of musculoskeletal system with hearing, and so on, and so on. This constant refinement of integration, permitting precise control of the movements, nourished the imagination, memory and imagination, the ability to recover and simulate in advance different scenarios of the body gesture into the space. But not only. In that long temporal phase, we must remember as our ancestors had not developed the voice. Our larynx actually will be relocated on its final position only with the Homo sapiens. Now it's easier to grasp the mimetic phase evoked by Merlin Donald, the importance of this long mimetic phase. Body gestures start to communicate without voice, symbols and meaning. embedding a fundamental element for our reasoning, the emotion. Nowadays, many linguistics and neuroscientists, as George Lakoff, Mark Johnson, and Vittorio Gallese, since the last 80s underlines as also the origin of our conceptual thought is derived from the broad presence of emotional meaning in the body, posture, and movement. From a set of 7 primary emotions, fear, rage, seeking, lust, panic, play, and care, deeply biologically regulated, largely studied by Jaak Panksepp, along with the mimetic phase, human enriched it with more refined background emotions, as Antonio Damasio would have called later the subtle physiological modification of the homeostatic balance. A constitutive part of the more complex sensory motor network of physiological modifications differently composed for each body gesture. So our erectus ancestors, developing a body language, crowded their minds with emotions, concepts, and minds. The complexity of their background required to externalize the knowledge of on the environment. Rituals so strengthen the groups, asking to be transformed in special shapes. Realizing these marvelous tools in the architecture of Göbekli, for example, they gift themselves with an enormous power. Architecture modified their minds terrifically. After Homo sapiens, they differentiated and distinguished the buildings for particular rituals and daily uses. Also in Göbekli, after the first phase with circle of stones for the cult of the dead, the second layer had even rectangular rooms with another vision of the space, more functional. So the gutters and the hunters became farmers, and the cities were at the horizons. Rituals and behaviors have always had from the beginning an awaited emotions. To gather the groups in the circle focusing on the death means focus also on the birth, opening the door to the first religious moment, maybe transcending it in the Eve emotions. So since the 9th millennium before Christ, these farmers began to cultivate the earth, planning places, designing new topologies, realizing street and engineering actively the external previous natural environment. So rituals correlated emotions embedded in different patterns of actions, always involving space, producing different architectural scenarios, modifying our mind without our minimal awareness. History of architecture could also be read as the history of the ways emotion have shaped rituals through many architectural disguises. The target was the attunement of people expectation with the experience of space, for the simple reason that from the very inception of architecture was exactly its task to couple, to trigger this kind of coupling, Our biological evolution requires to harmonize the shape of the architecture to the emotion projected from our mind to the external environment. So if we have to be admitted to the hospital, we start from a different set of awaited emotions, respect those we feel coming back home. Each one is the same if we enter in the court or in the office for a working day. Each experience is different. Each one requires different architectures, able to couple with different potential and metaphorical body gestures. Architecture, as the body movement, is composed in sequential shape by more units as by more micro body states. Euclidean geometry, topological correlation of different spatial units, proxemics, direction and intensity of light, materials, rhythm, texture, colors, acoustic, all these elements play with all the sensorial system, the proprioceptive, the exteroceptive, and the interoceptive channels of our bodies. Among levels of architectural composition and the sensory channels, the coupling is each time different, consistently with a different emotional atmosphere we are wait to live during each particular experience. The result is not random. If we see at the beginning of architecture as rituals petrified throughout spatial setting. From Göbekli Tepe, humans developed the typologies able to house the experiences learned during previous evolutionary phases. And thanks to the incremental power gifted by architecture's recursive and conscious perception, they will be able to enrich the few original rituals, building in also more sophisticated new shapes, devoted to couple space with a weighted feeling more subtle. James Gibson, in a book published in 1986, The Ecological Approach to Visual Perception, assumed that term affordances to describe the way through which the settings are configured to respond to animal-human needs, in a mutual correspondence among gestures and shapes. In the same period, in Parma, Giacomo Rizzolatti led the team that was searching how the brain controlled the body movement. During an experiment, they discovered as sensory motor cortex was activated not only when the monkey was performing the action, but also when the monkey simply was seeing someone else making the same action. The discovery of the mirror system, the way through which the brain simulates the external signals along these decades, is being extended also to the artworks and to the shape of the space. So, it's been recognized as the architectural compositions can or cannot trigger potential action. It seems the demonstration as a James Gibson theory of affordances is entirely consistent with the approach of MacLeod about the Neolithic revolution. Space triggers a potential pattern of action for the simple reason that the architecture originated by that projection of body gestures and rituals. Along with experience, we search in the environment the proper answer to an internal emotional demand. For each one of the different human experiences, we seek the appropriate architecture to host the potential and metaphorical action we continuously project outside. Well, in the Western architecture for the last 20th century, but also from the Enlightenment Revolution architecture, we lost attention gradually to the emotional ground of the human experience. The social and economic cost of this tragic and misleading approach to design are huge. Design is the search of the right affordance able to attune people with their ancestral emotional needs. We spend more or less 90% of our lifetime inside buildings. If we are not able to emotionally couple with the context wrapping our bodies, we must activate our cognitive system to make under control the imbalance produced. This effort has a cost, a mental fatigue that increases the stress progressively. If it is prolonged, it affects the relationship with other people, with our attention, with our memory capacity and learning. the more fragile people are the first affected. The proper emotional component of the behaviors is being almost totally forgot. But there's more. When recently someone posed the gaze on this issue, frequently they refer generically only to the background emotional wellness as the parsley in the cooking. Along the mimetic phase of evolution, the refinement of the body control produced a more elaborated and differentiated sequence of fixed pattern, action, and embedded emotion than wellness. These have been translated in architectural shapes along the whole history of architecture, along 12 millennia from Göbekli Tepe. Architecture has always been, from the very beginning, the projection of our inner state. Several reasons explains the loss of contemporary attention to these human needs. It derived by the Industrial Revolution, the functionalism in architecture, and by a misleading idea of rationalism. Antonio Damasio clearly demonstrated as the human relationship and the human rationalism is imbued of emotional content. Because emotion is a biological and after also a cultural part of our long, long evolution. A rational decision without its emotional component is not rational. As a place that does not take account the implicit and pre-reflective projection of our body patterns toward the space around us is not a place, but only material without soul, without life. So, neuroscience, biology, anthropology, and environmental psychology are now coming along with architecture and planning to rethink our places, cities and buildings. But we have to reinvent nothing. We must leave our ancient wisdom resurfaces, because fortunately, this misleading rationalism and the endless craving for profit did not completely erase this root. Is it easy? Not at all. But today we are here to speak about it. Thanks to everybody for the invitation and the attention.
Thank you, Mr. Ruzzon. Actually, you reminded me of what Palasma, the famous neuroarchitect, said. I just took it now word by word online. Modernist design at large has housed the intellect and the eye, but it has left the body and the other senses, as well as our memories, imaginations, and dreams homeless. And that's why now we are doing all this work today. Also, I would like to add about the definition of the five senses that dates back to Aristotle's The Anima Treatise of biopsychology, in which he developed each sense in a chapter. But now neurologists define 9 senses, and now there are even more 20 senses. So we are very delicate beings interacting with a complex sensitivity to our surroundings. Our second speaker is Dr. Jan Golembiewki. We will see him online. Dr. Golembiewki wanted to join us online, but due to his presence in Australia, and now it's around 2 a.m. in Australia, he pre-recorded his intervention, especially to this conference, and he will be ready to answer any questions you will deliver to me. And I also asked him a question added to his intervention, and he answered to it. So I will introduce him. Dr. Jan Golembiewki is a practicing architect who is acknowledged as a leader in innovation in evidence-based architectural and urban design. His research around behavioral, affective, and psychological reactions to the physical environment places him at the center of current thinking about the role the environment plays on both somatic and mental health work that earned him a fellowship in the Center for Urban Design and Mental Health and the Schizophrenia Research Institute, and professional roles such as place in the Expert Reference Group for Dementia Training Australia, as a judge for the International Academy for Design and Health Architecture Awards, and as a director of Psychological Design, Center of Research. Golembiewki understands that the nexus between architecture and health is anything but simple, and in order to learn more about the connection, he has spent several years looking at the neuroscientific basis for the relationship between health and design, much of which has been published in prestigious peer-reviewed journals and books published Nature and Oxford University Press. Now I will put the video on. No sound?
The environment is inextricably related to mental health. As a profound example, recent research replicates findings of a significant linear correlation between childhood exposure to the urban environment and psychosis. But that's not all. Studies also correlate the urban experience in childhood with aberrant brain morphologies, possibly explaining the psychosis in the first place. But why? And what can we do about it? We don't really know why the designed environment appears to be causal for mental illness, although we have some good ideas. But before we can dive into these, we need to know a little about mental illness itself, because it's not like infections that are passed through germs that cause our immune responses to react and our natural somatic functions to fail. In fact, a far more telling name for mental illness is the American term, behavioral illness, because it suggests the heart of the matter, that mental illness is far more about how someone acts than about what's going on inside their heads. Mental illness can't be diagnosed by aberrant scans or pathology, but only through the opinion of a qualified clinician based on telling symptoms, either as they're reported or ones that are in plain sight. They have to consider exclusions, the duration, and various symptoms, most of which boil down to two types. There are florid behaviors and beliefs like paranoia, delusions, or hallucinations. The other category are negative symptoms. These are notable absences of normal behaviors, such as alogia, which is a poverty of speech or an inability to construct meaning, avolition, which is a lack of motivation, or anhedonia, which is an inability to feel joy. The first set of florid symptoms are also known as positive, not because they're desirable, but because they're in addition to normal behaviors. The second set is often known as the negative signs, to differentiate them from the positive ones. If there are no symptoms or signs, there's no mental illness, notwithstanding diagnoses of episodic or intermittent illnesses. From personal experience, we all already know that the environment triggers or inhibits behavior, emotions, and even the ability to think or speak. Think about the behaviors you'll see and the conversations you'll hear in a nice restaurant, on a football field, or in a changing room. The restaurant is far more likely to inspire good conversation than the football field. And in a changing room, you're unlikely to hear a word, except maybe superficial chat between friends, about maybe a game that they've just had or the workplaces that they're frustrated by. And think about getting up on stage. Even the most learned people may choke with terror and go mute when presenting at a conference. But these are normal symptoms, ones that are contextually explicable. Would it still be normal if the learned professor choked up while chatting with her spouse or children at home? The contexts that we're talking about here are called behavior settings. Behavior settings exert a powerful passive force on people to inhibit behaviors that aren't designed and appropriate for the space. Design behavior settings by drawing on common typologies and a shared architectural language, and to a great extent, behavior settings determine the limits of behavior that can take place therein. But it's not the only consideration for behavioral health, and nor is it the only architectural consideration. There are also affordances. These are meanings and other perceptual demands which provide opportunities to act, or rather react. That is, opportunities to do, to think, or say something in response to what you've just been experiencing. Thus, affordances trigger behaviors in the opposite way that behavior settings inhibit them. There are niches to sit in, ladders to climb, hammams to steam in. A seat triggers an impulse to sit, and flowers an impulse to sniff. But we don't always act on these affordances. In fact, they're usually inhibited to some degree. Even the most positive of all affordances are rarely acted on with unreserved gusto, or at least a belly full of wine. And this is where behaviour settings come in. An apple masks the eat me message under another when it's in a supermarket. In this new setting, it says buy me. The undesirable affordances speak also, but with somewhat less benign tone. A gun instructs us to shoot, a knife to slash, cut, or stab. A cliff instructs us to jump, and a fluffy white gown in a hotel tempts us to steal. But these responses are naturally inhibited regardless of the behaviour settings. We still notice the pull of the cliff's edge, but usually respond by stepping further back. In fact, all negative responses are inhibited. At least they are, when we're healthy and sober. My research revealed that people with severe psychosis lack net inhibition when faced with undesirable affordances. Thus, they'll be far more likely to jump, to stab, or to steal given an opportunity to do so. The same people will also over-inhibit desirable affordances, and indeed this explains both the symptoms and the signs. Where symptoms are putatively caused by a lack of inhibition of undesirable experience, the negative signs are putatively over-inhibition of positive experience. And where it all takes place in the brain is critical here because functional anatomy dictates how a symptom or sign will present. So let's take a look at the brain, specifically at the frontal cortex. To understand what behaviour looks like without a frontal lobe, let's look at an animal that doesn't have one. Take a fish. Offer it a smaller fish, and it will snap. Environmental factors come into play. The fishy equivalent of behaviour settings might include the water temperature, the tide, and the behaviour of the whole school, but the fish has no choice about whether to eat or refuse the bait. Within the limits of the behaviour setting, it will act on the affordance. Fortunately, humans don't behave like fish, with little choice but to snap at bait dangled before them. Humans have developed neural mechanisms to prevent us from reacting uncontrollably to whatever experience is presented. These are the most distinctively humanoid parts of the brain, the great swelling of the frontal cortex. But when this area is damaged, people lose the ability to resist environmental cues. Among other behavioural changes after a lobotomy, for instance, the mere presence of a gun will trigger an irresistible desire to fire. Food will trigger an impulse to eat, a shop an impulse to buy, and so on. These impulses are known as environmental dependency syndrome and imitation and utilization behaviors. The over or under inhibition isn't even. The florid symptoms of mental illness appear to be caused by a spillover of excess excitation potential in response to undesirable stimuli. Just like in physics, every neural action has an equal and opposite reaction. This surplus excitatory potential isn't lost, like forces which cause movement, heat, light, and sound in physics. Excess excitation feeds into other parts of the brain to emerge as uninhibited actions, thoughts, and automatic actions. The frontal lobe has a bunch of subregions that mediate different responses. Broca's area, for instance, allows a person to consider and construct words. The right dorsolateral prefrontal cortex allows various bits of information to remain actively conscious whilst the information is used elsewhere, and the perigenual anterior caudal cortex is used to bring declarative awareness to emotions. So the deregulation of inhibition of these regions may present as diverse symptoms and signs. An under-inhibited right dorsolateral prefrontal cortex may establish delusions. Perhaps an under-inhibited Broca's area might give rise to thought insertion symptoms, and an under-inhibited perigenual anterior caudal cortex as bizarre as inappropriate emotional responses. Conversely, overactivation may cause an inability to construct meaning, an inability to handle complex information or present as emotional bluntness. Of course, not all mental illnesses are the same, and likewise they all have different etiologies, but they do have common features. People suffering from psychosis tend to over-inhibit positive experiences and under-inhibit the negative ones. People with depression over-inhibit all experiences, and so too do people who have been diagnosed with post-traumatic stress, who, in addition, suffer from strong and inappropriate contextual and emotional cues. Manic activity involves selective criteria for under and over inhibition, which bears very little regard for desirability at all. We could bury ourselves in functional anatomy, relating it to various symptoms for ages because it's fascinating. And we could also talk about what's going on at other levels of the brain, but our purpose here is to talk about the built environment and what we can do to set things right. So let's return to our original correlations. Remember how the urban environment correlates tightly with increased psychosis. The reactions we have to affordances are often purposefully designed. The human-made world is designed for human use and is replete with representations and meanings that are lost on any other species. Symbols, words, icons, and implied uses and functions. These are easily identified by humans and are intrinsically connected to human psychic activity. Nowhere are the designed meanings, triggers, symbols, and so on more prevalent than in the urban environment. In the urban environment, just about everything is designed, manipulated by design, or caused by accidents and misalignments of design. Even the weather is affected in local microclimates by phenomena like heat islands and wind turbulence. In the city, even the detritus that flies around the streets is designed. Bits of packaging, reading matter, food, cigarette butts, and the litter from landscape design, street planting and gardens. Nearly every crumb has had a human hand with some kind of design intention at some point, and nearly every crumb is loaded with identifiable meaning. But no meaning is more palpable than the ones that are deliberate. The ubiquitous messages to buy, desire, and consume, messages that don't fall mute when the means aren't there to act on them, whatever those means may be: money, power, proximity, or even beauty. The impact of the urban milieu on an individual's psyche is pervasive, intense, and when the demands are undesirable or unattainable, they can even be toxic. The brain is permanently engaged in affordances of various kinds, and with each action, the brain grows or atrophies a tiny little bit with each action. So, it should come as no surprise that people who grow up in the city have brain morphologies and reactivity patterns that are distinct from those who grow up in the countryside. This puts designers collectively at the helm of a major force of functional neurodynamics. As I wrote in one of my journal articles, the fact that designers are generally unaware of the effects of their inventions on the brain, and therefore take no responsibility for this role, is deeply worrying. The world of design is like a highway where each and every driver is asleep at the wheel. In the narrative surrounding urban existence, we're far more likely to identify stories that work against us than in nature. It's much easier to speculate about the evil intentions of a closed-circuit television camera that's trained on your house than to identify the wicked intentions of a spinney of trees. Of course, a rural environment doesn't preclude evil intentions. There can be real fears that the spinney might be the home of a werewolf, but give me the risk of a werewolf any day over the real one of being mugged in a dark alley or robbed by a flash shopping centre. The issue here is that humans are sensitized to the designed world because design deliberately triggers human responses. The reactions that people have to nature, on the other hand, may have evolved through the millennia but are not intentional as such. The demands required by the designed environment are diverse, complex, and very specific. A product in a store is there to be bought, a seat is to be sat on, and cash is to be spent. Moving cars are to be avoided, and new ones in a dealer's lot are there to be desired. In contrast, the demands that the natural environment make on us humans tend to relate to play, nurture, discovery. A tree is there to be admired, to feed us, or there to climb on. and a mountain is there to be explored. The designed world isn't only a set of perceptual demands waiting to trigger mental illness. It can also protect the psyche. The attention we provide to familiar, predictable, and non-aversive surroundings is very minimal, meaning that as long as we're in a place with such qualities, we have the opportunity to let go. This is a significant protective neurological and environmental interaction, because perceptual sensitization is a key element of some mental illnesses like post-traumatic stress disorder, and is widely thought to be causal in others. There's a distinct environmental condition that is needed just to let go and let the quality of your awareness shift from time to time. This downtime has a very particular chemistry involving the dopamine receptors, which is incidentally the primary target of all traditional antipsychotics. Now, I can't discuss this chemistry here, but if you're interested, you'll find more in my academic papers. First and foremost, environments must be readable as non-adversive, so it doesn't trigger any florid symptoms or otherwise interfere with this downtime. If downtime is spent, as it often is, engaged in surprising narratives and other aesthetic engagements through writing, art practice, music, theatre or film, there may potentially be a benefit. Positive experience may directly address the negative signs of mental illness, such as emotional flatness. But because these signs are putatively caused by over-inhibition, designers have to work harder on designing in positive experiences and messages than they would for healthy people. Thus, positive affordances need to be doubly good to compensate. But remember, even if the results are only marginal, they're still worthwhile, because it's the negative signs rather than the florid ones that destroy the quality of life of those with mental illness. It should also be remembered that the signs are also notoriously difficult to target using traditional antipsychotic medication. I'm sometimes asked about neutral affordances when talking about positive or negative ones. This does get complex because the brain doesn't process neutral differently. Neutral emotions aren't really emotions at all. They kind of get wrapped up in the other emotions that are around. So, for example, if a child were to hate a school and were to hear the school bell, they might hate that school bell, although the bell itself might have a beautiful sound. For this reason, it's best not to try and rely on neutral. Another really important principle is that choice is essential. Again, there are a number of neurological reasons for this that can't be discussed here, but it's useful to think of humans as being continually engaged in activity, and having a choice of positive, happy activities is the ideal situation for people who are suffering mental illness. John Ziesel, the director of several Alzheimer's facilities over several decades, claims that undesirable behaviors simply vanish when there's a choice of good things to do. In this context, having nothing to do is almost as bad as having only bad choices. In summary, we must design for genuine respite if we're to achieve an environmental antipsychotic effect through our architecture. We also have to acknowledge that the subjects of the design are going to be super sensitive to negative environmental features. Designers are well practiced at creating nice and homely environments, but consider homeliness as just a first step toward full deinstitutionalization, and be willing to go further. There is no limit for the creative possibilities that designers can consider. Try taking steps to remove unpleasant features that might trigger symptoms. Do better than just nice or homely. Designers can use better finishes, views, furniture, and materials than they otherwise would in a domestic milieu. Design can protect people from undesirable environmental effects, including overexposure to other people, pollution, and even cigarette smoke. Design for a range of modalities. Think about visual impressions, a soundscape, the olfactory sense, about textures and comfort. Think about good wayfinding, access and egress. People never want to feel lost or trapped. Design a compelling and positive story. The intention should be to use the language of design to suggest that the subject is safe and comfortable. Narratives can be designed using thematic expressions, much like a stage set. positive and rewarding activity is a really useful tool. Choices of wholesome things to do and to play with. Think about fun and cool spaces, about transformative ones, about niches, nooks, hidden gardens and other treasures. It's not enough just to offer respite, because a full antipsychotic effect can only be achieved with conscious engagement. So design in a choice of things to think about: learning, writing, making art and music, gardening, cooking, animal husbandry, performance, religion, hobbies, reading and sports. A further benefit of designing opportunities for engagement is that such interests are infectious. So there is a greater social benefit, and they're ongoing. People can take these ideas and interests with them wherever they go, and these skills will prove protective against mental illness or relapse. This is the true meaning of recovery-centric design. This talk provides insight into the language of design for mental health, and also about the kinds of things to do and what to avoid. Design is a powerful antipsychotic, but fear not, the bar is really very low when it comes to design for mental health. If this theory were to be more prescriptive, if there were to be a risk of side effects, were to recommend a reversal of humanist approaches to design, then a more rigorous and empirical testing would be critical before these principles are employed. But when the risks are low and the potential benefits are very high, sometimes critical medical interventions must employ the theory now and test those theories later. Thank you.
He will hear your applause because we'll upload the video on YouTube. I asked Dr. Golembiewki a question because it's a part of the discussion. I asked him, Marian Hirsch talked about post-memory. She said, and I'll quote, post-memory characterizes the experience of those who grow up dominated by narratives that preceded their birth, whose own belated stories are evacuated by the stories of the previous generation, shaped by traumatic events that can be neither fully understood nor recreated. And closing the quote. The silence resulting from trauma transmits the wounds and not the memory. How does that apply in Beirut's case, where the architecture that we have today replaces the pre-war Beirut with the skyscrapers and other constructions that are limiting public spaces, and where people, whether locals or immigrants or even foreigners, tell us to just forget about war or certain events that affected us and about what happened in the past and just move on. بس بدي أقول شغلة يعني هي الفكرة إنه منشوف دول العالم كلهم بيعملوا memorials كتير بيعملوا محلات نتذكر شو صار تما نعيد اللي صار في ناس بيعملوا ذكرى 100 سنة وال200 سنة على أحداث صارت ونحن عنا بيقولوا لنا نسوا وكفوا فهذا كان سؤالي لإله. His answer was the following. He answered a little bit in an expert way in this field, but I will try to sum it up. While I have no reason to question Hirsch's proposition that silences can convey meaning and memory, there is also strong evidence that specific learned behaviors are transmitted epigenetically. In 2005, Harper's stress study reported that learned maternal stress responses in the later half of a pregnancy is carried through to grandpups, even when both mother and grandmother are sacrificed at the pup's birth. If this is true for humans, there is anecdotal evidence, then there is a real responsibility on designers to really care and to create quality over quantity. Because psychotoxic design can potentially continue to exert and influence way after exposure, possibly lifetimes later. So هون كمان عن كل identity of a city. Now I'm not in Beirut, but I think there is a negative affordance and loss. I showed him a picture of same places before and after. after يعني بعد الأعمار مش بس إنه بعد الدمار. And here I speak of the loss of the picturesque old Beirut style. This might bring up trauma for people who survived the war. Inescapable negative affordance is best handled by the opposite choices of positive experiences. I also imagine that some of the modern skyscrapers changed local weather patterns and may have other negative effects, but I doubt the buildings could be considered psychotoxic as such, like some brutalist post-war housing elsewhere. يعني البنايات اللي بيبقوا كتير مجمعين على بعضهم يعني فيهم كتير سكن ومستفين وشكلهم شوي على بيتهم. The question for designers is there enough affordance in these areas to give people the opportunities they need to move on? كيف فينا ننسيهم إذا كل شيء مبين قدامهم؟ In my talk, I skipped past the idea of conceptualizing the environment as stage sets for the context within which people will live. It's good to remember this as a strategy when dealing with psychotoxic urban environments. This idea seems flippant, but it has a solid neuroscientific rationale. Our limbic regions beautifully designed to decipher narratives and attach meaning to them. This meaning carries emotional, psychologists say affective qualities, and so brain reacts positively or adversely according to the narratives that are structured into the environment. The environment طبعاً عم بخبرنا القصة. So if our environment is telling us the story, we will take this story and work based on it, even if it is not according to what we want to the story we want to have. Our narrative processors have dual engines. The limbic regions are split in two and are connected by the corpus callosum. It's part of the brain. The doubling allows us to carry dual conflicting stories at the same time. Conflicting stories. The left limbic organs notionally manage current stories. Here you are all in this seminar. He is talking to you. The right side carries broader narratives. You can carry this material back to work and use it to improve how you address mental illness with your designs. When both sides identify good signals, everything's fine. And when there is dissonance between the hemispheres, contradictive stories, things are generally still okay, but there are warning signals preparing us for flight. So, especially when both hemispheres identify negative stories when it's time to panic. Whether we know it or not, as architects, we manage this neural process by creating positive stage sets. This is likely to establish a reading narrative within the right hemisphere, providing a background of security and safety. This is essential, especially when a population carry traumatic memories, because people need to find the right kind of space to, as you say, move on. Now, excuse me, I don't let pass any event without talking in depth about Beirut, our precious Beirut. So I would like to thank our third speaker, Dr. Mady, for joining us. Dr. Christine is an assistant professor in urban planning, urban design and architecture at Ramiz Shahouri Faculty of Architecture, Arts and Design at the Notre University-Louaize, Lebanon, and the chairperson of the Department of Architecture. Her background is in architecture at the AUB, infrastructure planning at the University of Stuttgart, city and regional planning at Cardiff University. She has lectured at several European and Lebanese universities on topics related to urban planning. Her research interests include public space and property rights, temporary urban uses, urban planning and public health, and planning for social infrastructure. Dr. Christine has received several research awards and grants, including the Werner von Siemens Award in 2007 and the International Fellowship by the Urban Studies Foundation in 2014, where she conducted postdoctoral research at the Henley Business School, University of Reading, UK, focusing on public space planning in post-conflict situations, particularly in relation to mitigating social divides. Christine's interest in research is coupled with her professional urban planning experience, specifically in countries of the Middle East region. Dr. Mady, the floor is yours.
Good evening, and thank you for joining this very interesting seminar. I need to make a very brief introduction before I start this presentation. I will not be addressing the relation between the human brain and the built environment. Rather, I will be addressing the relation of open spaces, or what is not built, and memory, both memory and collective memory. This is research that I started in 2016, and it was really triggered by three things. The fact that I grew up in Lebanon during the war period, the fact that I'm an architect and witnessed changes in the built environment before and after the war, and the fact that I teach at university, and I find it very difficult to understand how students who were born in the late 90s talk about the demarcation line and what they think of Beirut and its division. I will not read through the slides, and the presentation is actually based on a book chapter. The reference is available at the end of the PowerPoint presentation, but I will try to highlight several points following this outline. A few years ago, I was very interested in Henri Lefebvre's book on rhythm analysis. And I was intrigued to see that Lefebvre actually refers to Beirut as an example to talk about how social practices in a city can be changed from polyrhythmic, that means you have different rhythms of activities happening in a city, to arrhythmic, that means they are interrupted. And somehow this is like the beating of a heart that has a certain medical problem where you have disruptions or irregularities in the heartbeat. And I am very much also interested in Lefebvre's understanding of space and how it relates to social practices, because space does not have a meaning if we do not associate that meaning to it. And therefore, if we think of situations of instability or insecurity, that means that people would generally avoid being in places that are public for various reasons. And that means that encounter between people is going to decrease. So what happens if we want to reinstate a normal everyday life in a city? That means that we are trying to reinstate a certain rhythm in the city. And this is a starting point that I will build upon. But public spaces are also very important in the life of a city, and I will try to show again through the example of the Beirut pine forest, Hirsch Beirut, why this could be of interest or of significance. I refer also to two scholars, Patsy Healy and Sabine Kniebein, who also build on Lefebvre's understanding of space in relation to social practices. And they both talk about the importance of facilitating encounter, because encounter builds the coexistence and the acceptance of differences to some extent. And social interaction is important not only with those whom we know, but also with those whom we don't know and who are different from us. And Patsy Healy says that actually in unstable contexts, this applies as well, the management of coexistence of people requires that we understand social relations, but also the values that people hold to a place. And values are very much contextual, so what has a value or has meaning for one person or one society might not be the case for another. So the research, which is this book chapter which I'm presenting today, was interested in the work of an NGO, Nahnu. And why was that of relevance to the topic? It is because if you are in a society that suffers of social disintegration, how do you bring people together to actually start and understand each other's values? So the importance of having a platform for exchange pops in. And if we talk about divided cities, of course, some locations in the cities could lead to differentiation, discrimination, or exclusion. But the more worrisome aspect is that if this happens over generations rather than for one generation, how can then people interact in public spaces? So is it possible that if we forge relations between people over time, that we can overcome the limited interaction of people only to kin or those in their community. And this is an aspect that the sociologist Samir Khalaf pointed to after the war period. The tendency of Lebanese communities were that they only interacted with those that they knew or were related to. So this takes me to the next point, which is memory, and what is the relation between memory, space, and social practices. I built on the work of two scholars, Michael Hebert and Maria also mentioned Marianne Hirsch. Our understanding of memory, or the understanding of memory that I would like to follow in this presentation, is that memory is dynamic. And there is no singular memory. Even this, one individual's memory could change over time. And memories could often be conflicting, but they are very much related to space. So Maria also mentioned that when we remember something, we tie it to a situation or to a location that we were in. So that means that a space or a built environment could also shape our memory. Maybe we are aware of this, maybe we are not aware of this. And if we think on the scale of not an individual but a society, social practices that are turned into habits, and again we're going back to Lefebvre, so there is a certain rhythm, are usually persistent over time, and they could imprint how we think of a collective memory within the city, of being in the city. And of course, collective memories are nurtured over time, but they are also culturally framed. So the collective memory of one population will differ from the collective memory of another. And also, as Maria explained, they are shared narratives. And they commemorate certain practices, but they also help in forging a certain identity. And this identity, of course, is a link between the past and the present. In prolonged situations of conflict, and here I'm referring to the Lebanese Civil War, what happens to this collective memory when we are referring to generations rather than one generation? This is where I borrow from the definition of Marianne Hirsch about post-memory. And this is not a memory that one experiences or builds on their own. It is a memory that is actually inherited. It is given onto somebody from predecessors. So I would not, for instance, remember what happened in Martyrs Square, but I would hear stories about Martyrs Square from my parents. And to some extent, I probably would have the tendency to believe what my parents tell me and take it as factual. The definition that Hirsch provides for post-memory is that it is an inherited form of memory that forges both mnemonic bonds to the past and repressive binds to the present. And this is where it differs from collective memory. Because instead of believing what we are experiencing now, we are tied to what we were told about a certain space and what happened in that space. And post-memory, as I said, is not personally experienced, it is socially transmitted. And it also affirms certain identities, which of course brings us back to being or feeling secure within circles of kinship and community, as opposed to having the courage to go to places in the city that we have not experienced, but we don't dare because we were told that we should not go there or it is not good for us to be there. So what is the risk for the young generation? And by that I mean the generation that has not lived through the experience of the Lebanese war. They run the risk, according to Larkin, of actually having their own stories or their own experience of places in the city displaced by the memories of a previous generation. So the question here and the relation to the work of Nahnu was, what if we try to establish activities, social practices in public spaces in the city that help generate collective memories that could perhaps move aside post-memories and allow people to experience the city differently? I will not go into the details of the Lebanese war, but will try to extract points that relate to Hirsch Beirut. So the 1975 to 89 war resulted in a divide of the city. And it is strange that the divide started and ended with two public spaces, Martyr Square and Hirsch Beirut. Not to talk about the rest of the public spaces in the city and what happened to them. Basically, they were avoided. So this is just a plan of Beirut that ties Martyr Square to Hirsch Beirut. And here I borrow from Hannah Arendt, who says something about public space which very much demonstrates what happens if we do not have public spaces in a city. And she says, where a number of people gathered around a table might suddenly see the table vanish from their midst, so the two persons sitting opposite each other were no longer separated but also would be entirely unrelated to each other by anything tangible. And this is what happens if you remove the public spaces in a city. You do not have this medium where you could have encounter with others. After the end of the war, the first reinstatement of public spaces was to open roads, so the road network. But public spaces were not a priority, and Hirsch Beirut did not open until 2015, did not open fully until 2016. And people continued to use the city or navigate the city in relation to war memories and then post-memories. And in 2005 onwards, we saw many, heightened processes of securitization, lots of obstacles, barriers, road closures, etc., which also required that people adapt to how they navigate in the city. And for the young Lebanese population who did not live through the war, what did that mean in terms of how they experience spaces and which spaces in the city? Nahnu, an NGO that were formed in 2013, wanted to capitalize on that specifically in relation to the young generation. And what is interesting is that they had an understanding that public space has a role to play in the city in relation to different communities, just like a living room in a Lebanese house has, just as a living room in a Lebanese house has a role to play between family members, friends, neighbors, and so on. And they did speak about the collective memory of public spaces in the city and the importance of encounter in overcoming divides caused by the war. And they capitalized on Hirsch Beirut because they thought that this park is actually an opportunity to return to the identity of the city away from divides and the social disintegration that occurred partly because of the war. I will not go into the details of their activities. I will suffice to say the following. Hirsch Beirut was actually planted as a forest in the 1600s by Amir Fakhreddin Man II, and gradually it ended up being a triangle that is circumscribed by 3 roads in its current state. And if we look at the timeline from 1975 to 2016, Hirsch Beirut was actually an area of the city that was a blind spot for many, especially those who did not know it before the war. Nahnu's role was to look at the location from a different perspective. That means to change the narrative of the Hirsch based on at least those 4 points. So basically a natural space in the city, but also placing it back mentally into people's memories. And they used various tools. One of them is actually language. And language was important. What language will be used to try and communicate awareness and importance of public spaces to different users and the young generation. In June 2016, the park opened. Of course, there were campaigns, different programs addressing different population groups and neighbors, as well as people coming into the park from other parts of the city. And funny enough that the plan of Hirsch Beirut is displayed as such, although if we put north up, as architects usually do, we see that the plan has been rotated. thus dissolving any relation to East and West. I will go on to conclusions, and I think we will have some time for discussion. In one of the slides, I mentioned that the problem of public spaces in Lebanon was how to reinstate public spaces that are neutral, in the sense of not having any socio-political belonging to anyone, but equally shared by all people. And did reopening the park suffice? Or should we think more of the integration of the park spatially and socially to its surroundings, to really claim that it has been emancipated or freed from post-memory? Or is it currently used by people who do not have memories and post-memories of the war? So this is the question that I end up with. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Mady. To sum it up quickly, as we just saw, there is an interaction between the conception and the experience. All the disturbances created in the city, from the simple noises to earthquakes or wars. And by the way, some Lebanese call it civil war, some Lebanese refuse to call it civil war. Can be described as a public event that can intrude private aspects of life and where all the inhabitants of a city are concerned and touched in one way or another. In other words, this element, whether tangible or not, can compose a barrier forbidding people to work and socialize. It can also destroy memories and build other memories, or force the building of certain memories through several ways. Plus, another consequence of a city's disturbances is the sense of over-attachment. It's like when we start talking about the glory of Beirut for foreigners who don't know even Beirut. And they are a little bit surprised of the way we talk about it. Or on the opposite, the complete, let's say, not sense of detachment, rather sense of loss. Such as when our parents say, you will never experience the Beirut we experienced. So we know we lost something, but what is the spirit that we lost from the space? Are there any questions? Please, Mr. Ruzzon, may join us.
Some small comments?
Sure.
Okay. I will basically speak a little bit about about Christine Mady's presentation. First of all, your reference to Henri Lefebvre is very interesting. Lefebvre was my guru when I was young. So, and when you spoke about this rhythm analyse of Lefebvre, in fact, the first conference Lefebvre gave about the rhythm analyse was a small conference presented in Venice in 1984 or 83, I don't remember anymore. And I was there. And Lefebvre was very old. It was some years before his death. And he presented a small conference called the Rythme Analyse des Villes Méditerranéennes, where he spoke about Beirut. I was presenting a presentation about Beirut and the war in Beirut. So it's funny that you... Then coming back to another issue. I really don't see the real difference between collective memory and post-memory. I understand, for you, collective memory is a positive side and post-memory, but I don't think there is such a division. There is no collective memory is not a given. A collective memory is something which is created. It is transmitted by a previous generation, and it's very often a sort of, it's not something that is given by itself. It's created even by our generation looking out at the past. So it's something that is somehow transmitted and somehow reinterpreted by us. Every society at every time comes and reinterprets its tradition. Tradition is not a given, you know that, okay? Tradition is something that is reinterpreted, recreated, and it's always the case. So I don't see the difference really between collective memory and post-memory. I think that it's the same, and these are two contradictory aspects of the same reality, maybe. Collective memory is a contradictory issue. It is something that is, it's not simple, you know, like tradition. It's always contradictory. And okay, all these are the same, for me, it's the same. About the Hirsch Beirut, here also a small remark. There have been a competition, architectural landscape competition in 1993, which was launched for the revitalization or redesign of Hirsch Beirut. Four groups, 4 teams were selected. I was part of one of these teams. What's very interesting is to see the difference between one proposal and another. I will speak about our proposal. For us, the main issue was to create a design that would allow the Hirsch Beirut to be open immediately. And it was a design which was based on the creation of islands of pine, because pine trees require a long time to grow, and then a big prairie that was open for the public, and that where the public could start practicing again. Obviously, our proposal was too, what can we say, too modern, maybe too much focusing on social issues, while the selected design was a more classical type of thing. This round circle, which is at the center of the park, at that time was proposed to be a fountain, like a lot of traditional European parks with a fountain in the middle, etc. But what's for me, and for me it's still a real issue today, I mean, the fact that the topography of the Hirsch was modified, because the winning issue and the winning design, and which has been really created or executed, is a design where the whole topography of the park has been changed, with hills around this central circle. So in fact, the park is closed. Visually, you cannot see from one side to another. It's closed. It's a sort of introverted park, where our solution was an open park. And I think it's very interesting that this design was chosen. It is somehow a sort of reaction to the war. It's something, you create an introverted space because you consider that what's outside is dangerous. So you have to create an introverted space which is pacified, and what's around is dangerous. Our solution was totally contrary, was saying that, well, what's around is more important than the park itself, than the Hirsch itself, and the Hirsch should be in relationship with all the neighborhoods around. It was a completely different, and this is interesting to see how the design is related to a sort of a state of mind. I mean, when you're afraid of what is around, and you want to create a sort of protective space, you create an introverted design. When you think that what's around should be open and a relationship should be should be really created in order immediately that people start interacting with each other, you create another design. Sorry طولت شوي ما تواخذوني بس انه هيدي اشياء بتهمني.
No, actually you raised a very interesting point, but I will first try to explain the difference between collective and post-memory as used in this presentation. Yes, they do overlap. The difference is that collective memory is that memory of a mass when they have experienced it, and post-memory is when it has been told onto another generation. So this is the differentiation that is being made, because if you have lived through a collective experience, and Hebert specifically talks about the role of streets in building collective memories, the deformation of the memory over time is not as significant as the deformation of it being passed on to somebody who was not in the actual location. Now, thank you for raising the point of the competition, because I remember you coming to AUB and telling us about your but I was very lucky to observe something in Alexandria after the Egyptian Spring. And it was a change in the design of, we were taken specifically to 2 parks in Alexandria, whose design after the spring season was changed. The parks were before that open access, not fenced, and had large, flat, open spaces that allowed for congregation. Right after the political incidents, they put flower beds, benches, edges, to actually not allow people to congregate. So I wonder if whoever selected the winning competition for Hesh Beirut wanted the park, even though an island in the middle of the city, to remain as a barrier between the 3 sides.
I would like to say something about collective memory. It could be a part of a brainwash, because sometimes with the repetitive patterns from a mass around you every day, people could become somehow victims of Stockholm syndrome. So they become convinced and they continue doing it. They overlap, yeah. And please the mic. And please just you say your name and your profession before asking.
مساء الخير، حبيب صادق، معماري على الحل. طيب أنا بشكركم اليوم، رح أحكي بالعربي لأنه في واحد بيناتنا بس، وأنا كتير مصر على نعمل إنتاج معرفي باللغة العربية خاصة بالموضوع اللي عم ينطرح اليوم. لأنه مواضيع انطرح 3 مواضيع تحت عنوان كتير مهم اسمه العقل والسلوك في البيئة المبنية. انطرح 3 قضايا، واحدة قضية علاقة الثقافة بالتطور البيولوجي للإنسان، واللي كانت هي المداخلة الأولى، وهي مسألة كتير مهمة، الثقافة والبيولوجيا والأنثروبولوجيا بالتحول ما بين السيطرة في منطقة السحر، وخاصة جوبلتيك هو نموذج اللي عم يصير عليه نقاش كتير جدي حول مفهوم الدين، وهل إنه الدين كان موجود ب9000 سنة قبل الميلاد أو لا، أو إنه هذا انتقال السحر إلى مبنى. وهذه قضية جدية مطروحة إلى علاقة بعمارة الإيمان أو عمارة ريش سميها ريليجيون أنا، بس هي العمارة التي سبقت الثورة الزراعية وبداية الأديان. وأنا بعتقد كتير مهم النقاش بهذا الموضوع خاصة بمنطقتنا، لأنه بمنطقتنا بنيت المدن الأولى واللي تأسست على السلطة والمعبد، وجوبلتيك هو واحد من النماذج التي ممكن نبدأ منها نحن في معرفة وقراءة البنية التاريخية المشكلة لمفهوم المدينة بمنطقة الشرق الأوسط، واللي هي مختلفة تماما عن أوروبا. الموضوع الثاني اللي هو موضوع انطرح من اللي زميلتنا حكت عنه من أستراليا، واللي عم يتحدث عن أنثروبولوجيا الحياة المعاصرة اليوم في علاقة الفرد مع الحيز المبني والحوار الحاصل ضمن البيئات اللي هي بيئات ميكروية بمجتمعاتنا المعاصرة. المداخلة الثالثة اللي هي مداخلة كانت كتير مهمة، وهي موضوع كمان بحد ذاته قائم له علاقة بالحيز العام، مفهومنا للحيز العام. أنا ما بدي أحكي يعني إنه ببلد بلبنان مثل لبنان أحيانا عم نعمل إسقاطات. أنا بعتقد في موضوع كتير مهم بالمداخلة الثالثة اللي هو الذاكرة. معناش ذاكرة، ما فينا نحكي عن ذاكرة جماعية، في ذاكرة الجماعات بلبنان. نكون صريحين، في ذاكرة الجماعات. حرش بيروت على منطقة تماس الحدود الجديدة بين السنة والشيعة والمسيحيين وإعادة توحيد البلد، وسط بيروت والإسقاط الذي حصل فيها إلى آخره. لن أتحدث هلأ بالتفصيل، بس أنا بعتقد انطرحوا 3 مواضيع كتير مهمين. بتمنى أنه تكون اليوم اللي حصل هو مدخل للتوسع فيهم لهودي القضايا، لأنه قضايا جديين حساسين عنا. يعني مهم جدا أنه عم يعملوا باب لطرح اليوم، عم يعملوا باب لمعرفة واقعنا. معرفة واقعنا عندنا مشكلة كبيرة. يعني أنا في أدوات فيني استخدمها، يعني بالموضوع اللي طرحتيه بالآخر، يعني فيني فوت من مدخل تونس اللي هو فيلسوف ألماني واللي حكي عن الجماعات المحلية وعن المفهوم العام. إذا عندنا مفهوم عام ببلد مثل لبنان، وأكثر إذا ما نروح لعند دوركايم اللي تحدث عن أهمية ذاكرة المجموعات المحلية والذاكرة العامة. وأنا بعتقد الذاكرة العامة، يعني نحن من مقولات بالستينات بلشت تطرح انه اليوم عندنا المفكر الايطالي شو اسمه لا اتذكر، المهم اللي طرح هل بعدنا فينا نتحدث عن مفهوم اليوتوبيا والايديولوجيا بالعمارة على مستوى المدن؟ انا بعتقد هذا كمان موضوع جدي للبحث فيه. هل نحن اليوم عم نعيش ايديولوجيا السلطة اللبنانية ومفهوم الحيز العام هو مفهوم مبني على الجماعات وعلى ذاكرة الجماعات؟ بعتقد أنا أنه السلطة عنا كمان بالمفهوم اللي طرحه زميلنا، السلطة عنا وإدارة السلطة وإدارة المدينة هي إدارة الطاغية، إدارة الهيمنة، الذاكرة المبنية على الطاغية وذاكرة الدين. ما زال مدينتنا تديرها سلطة ويديرها معبد منذ ما أسست مدن الشرق. ما بدي أطول، أنا بعتقد انطرح 3 مواضيع كتير مهمين. بشكر الرابطة على هذا الجهد، وبتمنى يكونوا هودي فاتحة لنركز بكل مساحة على موضوع محدد. شكرا.
It's Nadine Hindi, from architect from NDU. Actually, I would like to continue on what my colleagues have started. So on Mr. Tabit and Dr. Sadiq talking about memory, and I would like to also tie it to the how urban memory can become also how the space itself can instate another urban memory. That in the case of Hirsch Beirut. Talking about memories, collective memories, and post-memory, but I think now we can talk about urban memory, which is instated by the actual condition of the opened Hirsch Beirut since 2016. And yes, things have changed over more than 40 years of war and closing the Hirsch. The war has started in 1975. And we still refer to it as if it's yesterday, but actually other wars happened even when the war ended. So as Dr. Sadiq said, there are other maybe unspoken demarcation lines that are maybe religious, and the location of the Hirsch is very delicate. So it's among maybe some informal demarcation lines, and that I think that the closure of the Hirsch actually is also maybe intentional. I've read two days ago on the website of Nahnu that there are doors that are closed to the side of Shia, for example, and these fans.
We need to be faster to just give one more chance of question.
Yeah, actually, I would tackle maybe one point that maybe Dr. Mady can answer. That you mentioned a simple detail, how the map is turned from north to east-west, and how it's maybe related only to a couple of roads. But this is actually a main issue of how to represent a memory in a map. And what do you think of the relation of the Hirsch to its surrounding, to its complete isolation of its surrounding, despite the fact that there are two bridges that cross over roads from Kaskas to the Hirsch and from Shiyah to the Hirsch, and there are pedestrian bridges that connect both roads, and however, both sides are really closed. The fence is to the other side, to the third side.
We will take the question now, one more question, and we will have the answer, please.
Good evening, Paola Ardizzola, Lebanese American University. I have a question for Davide Ruzzon. Thank you very much for your very interesting presentation. You say that architecture is the projection of our inner emotion, and I do agree, but I am considering, nowadays practice of doing architecture is based on new processes. For instance, I'm sure that you know about the parametric design, in which, for instance, you are just considering some parameters, very, very cold parameters, like I need 10 linear meters for shops, for instance, or, other very objective parametric issues, and then the software will somehow determine the final design. So because I do believe, I do trust in what you said, but unfortunately it's not anymore time of architects as Frank Lloyd Wright or Bruno Taut. So especially because I know that you are also a lecturer at University in Venice, I wonder how, in the light of this new design approach, how can we teach to our students somehow to consider, to include, to develop this consciousness, this awareness of architectural design as, projection for fulfilling our inner emotion? Thank you.
Please allow Dr. Christine to answer.
In 2016, July 2016, when I collected mainly through interviews and then site visits to Hirsch Beirut, interviews with Nahnu, I asked this question: what did they notice about the integration or interaction of the reopening of the Hirsch with its surroundings? And Nahnu tried again to use media, and I showed it quickly on one of the slides, to try and introduce neighbors of different parts of the Hirsch to each other. However, the damage that has been done by planning to circumscribe the Hirsch with 3 highways, more or less, is not that easily reversible, 1. 2, in the chapter, I quote what Nahnu answered when they asked Beirut municipality, why didn't you open that gate? And the response was, we do not have enough wardens. And I think the answer is very comic. So yes, the complexity of integrating the Hirsch does not lie only in physical design or in activism, but also in management decision of what to do between the Hirsch and the city.
Please, Mr. Ruzzon.
Thanks for the question. That is a very important question, this, because our approach to design now is strongly affected by the presence of the availability of these instruments, the parametric design, the algorithm. Well, I think it's possible to develop, we developed a method to face these issues. In Venice, our master is grounded in this kind of approach. because it's possible to analyze, it's possible to find out, to describe the elements of the composition that we have to manage to obtain the result, to attune the expectation of people. The awaited emotion, as I'm used to call these kind of elements. But nevertheless, I do not erase the possibility to use also the algorithm and the instruments of computer to organize the relationship, the complex relationship of all these factors, of the elements that we are describing using this kind of attention. For example, recently, really recently, in Milan, we are trying to define the method to refurbish and redesign completely the area of the last expo in Milan in 2015. It's a very huge area, and an Australian company bought all the 1 million square meter to redevelop a part of the city, and we are going to propose a new method to approach the master plan, to this kind of master planning, of the planning, urban planning. In this kind of method, or this method, we set up the different kind of algorithms, creating the relationship among all the different factors that we think is very, very urgent to manage from our point of view, from the point of view of people interested in the attunement about the emotional dimension and the experience of space. We have not time here to describing which is the right. It is possible to use maintaining the idea that the output of a computer is never a design, never. It's only an advisor. It's a simple an advisor that suggests scenarios, different scenarios. Because pushing one button, you can obtain several scenarios that you have not. They have to decide which is the right scenario. You have to select to proceed and to go ahead with the design. The design is not produced by computer, never, from my point of view. But the challenge is very big. It's a very big challenge because now in every studios, the students, the younger students, are growing up with the idea that it is possible to realize design through parametric. It's not true. It's not a design. It's not a design. You have to decide at the end which is the scenario more closer to your idea, and from that point you have to develop the design. It's not a design. And this is my answer. And the theme of the memory that you are evoking is very important because I started my speech speaking about memory. Emotions and ideas were the content that the first human decided to externalize in the form architecture, exactly to produce a reference that they need to utilize continuously to strengthen their memories, to strengthen the identity. And so, which is the different, from my point of view, the difference between post memory and real and actual memory. I saw yesterday, for example, at the library in Beirut, is a building recently refurbished. In the skin of this library is been voluntarily, clearly, lived with the memory of the past. From the sensory point of view, to perceive that kind of skin, produce an activation of the simulation strongly, absolutely stronger than the perception, for example, of a video about history. you have to take account that in urban settings, if you reorganize and maintain some real parts of the history of the city, you produce an attunement absolutely able to reinforce stronger than the normal instrument that you can use to communicate, to transmit memory for video, books, because the perception of the environment can affect strongly the level of activation of the imagination. Absolutely.
Mr. Ruzzon, we will have time. Thank you for staying all this time with us. We will have time to discuss further around the cocktail. Please join us. Thank you.
It's late.
Thank you for this.
Thank you. Please, Mr. Ruzzon, we have only one picture together. Have one picture together.
Oh yeah,
Hello,
absolutely.
it's not that
Davide Ruzzon. Ciao.
When? What are the screen?
Thanks very much.
Keep the memory.
To keep
Keep it intangible.
intangible